The revealed history of Russia. The story of this vast colossus called Russia doesn't begin with tanks, nor with red flags, nor with Vladimir Putin crossing the gates of the Kremlin. Russia's story begins in the ice, in the dense, dark forests of Eurasia, where the wind cuts the skin like a blade, and where survival was never a choice. It was always the only option. There more than 1,500 years ago, isolated Slavic tribes, Varangian adventurers from the north, and Eastern merchants crossing the Silk Road, met, sometimes as allies, sometimes as mortal enemies. And it is from this clash of worlds, this improbable fusion of cultures, wars, and beliefs, that one of the most enigmatic, violent, and fascinating empires that humanity has ever witnessed would emerge. Prepare yourself. Today you will traverse 1,200 years of power, paranoia, grandeur, and fear. From the Tsars to the KGB, from medieval Rus to modern Putin. This is the explained history of Russia. The formation of the first Russian state, Kievan Rus. When we talk about Russia, few imagine that its roots weren't in Moscow, nor in St. Petersburg, but rather almost 1,000 kilometers to the south, in a place that today belongs to Ukraine, Kyiv. It is there in the heart of the trade routes that link the Baltic to the Black Sea that the first great chapter of this story unfolds. The Kievan Rus, the embryo of what would one day become the largest country in the world. Imagine the scene, long, barge-like ships coming from the icy lands of Scandinavia, descent down narrow and dangerous rivers, transporting merchants, warriors, and conquerors. Chroniclers called them the men of the oar, but they would be remembered as something much greater. The founders of the first Russian Slavic state, under the leadership of semi-mythological figures like Rurik, and later Oleg and Igor, the Slavic tribes were unified by force, not through diplomacy, but by the sound of steel meeting wooden shields. It was during this period that Kyiv became a strategic jewel, rich, connected, influential. A city that commanded trade routes where Arab silver, Scandinavian wool, honey, furs, and slaves circulated like blood through the arteries of medieval Europe. But the moment that would transform this new civilization into something greater than a barbarian kingdom was yet to come. In 988, Prince Vladimir the Great made a decision that would forever change the destiny of Russia, Ukraine, and the entire Slavic world. He converted to Orthodox Christianity and converted the entire state with him. This choice was not spiritual, it was geopolitical. It was strategic. It was brilliant. Because by adopting the Orthodox faith of Byzantium, the Kievan Rus came to be seen as the cultural, political, and religious heir of one of the most sophisticated empires in history. And so at the end of the 10th century, not a nation was born, but a myth, the myth of a people destined for imperial greatness. A myth that would continue to shape Russia for more than a millennium. For centuries, Kievan Rus flourished, but no empire, however prosperous, can escape the weight of destiny, and destiny arrived on horseback. In the 13th century, the Eurasian fields began to echo with the terrifying sound of tens of thousands of hooves. The deadliest army the medieval world had ever seen, the Mongols. They came from the east like storms of steel, with impossible speed, unbreakable discipline, and a ferocity that no European kingdom was prepared to face for Rus. The Mongols were not just an enemy. They were a cataclysm. Fortified cities, burned, fertile fields, reduced to ashes, entire peoples, enslaved or exterminated. Kyiv, the jewel of Slavic civilization, was sacked with a brutality that echoes to this day in history books. The chroniclers wrote that the survivors walked through ruins, where not a single living soul remained. Then begins what tradition calls the Tartar yoke, more than 200 years of submission to the Golden Horde. But contrary to what one might imagine, this humiliation did not destroy the spirit of the Russian people. On the contrary, it was during this period that a small city, hidden among forests and swamps, began to quietly gain strength. Moscow. There were no golden palaces, nor large armies. The city was modest, surrounded by forests and rivers, but there was something that set it apart. Cunning and patience, Moscow learned quickly. It learned to survive under the horde. It paid tribute, cultivated alliances, while other cities were sacked and forgotten. Over time, the principality began to accumulate influence. Neighboring territories joined Moscow, not by force, but by the security and strategic vision of its leaders. Then came Ivan III, the Great, a man who understood something fundamental. Power is not measured only in battle. Power is measured in control, in centralization, in strategic patience. In 1480, Ivan broke the Mongol yoke. No decisive war, no epic confrontations, just firmness and calculation. Russia finally regains its independence. And then, the next inevitable step arrives, the title of Tsar. His grandson, Ivan IV, the Terrible, would not be just a ruler. He would be the symbol of a new Russia, united, powerful, and feared. Ivan IV created the Oprichnina, a personal militia that spread terror and obedience. He carried out massacres, eliminated enemies, but also expanded Russian territory like no other before him. Little Moscow, born from the ashes of the Tatar yoke, became the heart of an emerging empire. Russia was now unified and thirsty for power. The stage was set for the following centuries, of violent conquests, absolute paranoia, and of a grandeur that would enchant and terrify the world. If Ivan IV was terror, Peter would be the earthquake, a giant almost 2 meters tall, not only in body but in vision. Peter didn't want a sleeping Russia, stuck in agriculture and ancient traditions. He wanted a modern empire, a power capable of competing with any European kingdom. Peter traveled through the West, observed ships, arsenals, vibrant cities, and returned determined Russia needed to change or die. He built St. Petersburg, a city erected on swamps, a window to Europe that would shine as a symbol of modernity. He formed a naval fleet, organized the army, imported engineers, artisans, and foreign technology. There was no time for consensus. The nobility, reluctant, had to adapt. Beards were shaved, clothes and customs altered, and the entire country was forcibly pushed into the 18th century. Peter was not just a reformer, he was a ruthless master of power. He understood that to create a Russia capable of challenging Europe, it was necessary to break with the past, even at the cost of pain, resistance, and violence. Russia, for the first time, tasted modern greatness. But it also knew the price of ambition, radical changes, internal conflicts, and a people forced to bow to the vision of a single man. Peter had planted the seed of a new Russia. A Russia that would no longer be content with isolation, a Russia that looked to the West with determined eyes, and a force willing to do anything to become imperial. If Peter was the earthquake that shook Russia, Catherine would be the hurricane that would expand it. A woman of humble origins, a foreign princess who arrived at the Russian court without a right to the throne, but with an ambition that burned brighter than any Kremlin fire. Catherine, as strategist and conqueror, she transformed Russia into the greatest territorial power in Europe. She annexed Crimea, guaranteeing access to the Black Sea. She expanded borders to the east and south, incorporating peoples and lands that previously seemed unreachable. But Catherine's strength was not only military. She knew how to manipulate politics, dominate the court, and suppress internal revolts with a mixture of cunning and brutality. Under her rule, Tsarism reached its peak. Monarchs who believed themselves to be anointed by God, a gigantic country governed with an iron fist, but also with a vision of grandeur and international prestige. Catherine promoted culture, arts, and philosophy, bringing European intellectuals to the court, making Russia not only a military power, but also a beacon of civilization for the continent. But not all greatness came without a price. Modernity was arriving, and each step forward carried conflicts, tensions, and sacrifices. Catherine, like Peter before her, showed that Russia could be enormous, powerful, feared, and ruthless, but miserable. A vast empire, full of riches and territory, but still trapped in medieval customs, lagging behind the industrial world. Wars and disasters. The Russo-Japanese War of 1905 exposed the Tsars' weakness. A humiliating defeat, the first spark of discontent that would spread throughout the empire. World War I? An absolute disaster. Millions of poorly equipped soldiers died, the economy collapsed, and the people starved while the court remained isolated in the luxury of the palace. Nicholas II, a man out of time. The Tsar tried to govern, but his power seemed like a ghost compared to the reality of the burning streets. Famine spread. Then, the impossible happened. The streets of Petrograd were transformed into political battlefields. The people rose up, the workers marched, the soldiers changed sides. The millennial regime of the Romanovs came to an end. Centuries of tradition and power collapsed in weeks. The Tsar abdicates, his family is imprisoned, and the Bolsheviks entered triumphantly, announcing a new era. The legacy of the collapse. The end of the Tsars was not just a change of leaders. It was the end of a world, of an old Russia, of an empire that considered itself eternal. And in place of the monarchy, something emerges that would change everything. A radical, violent, and ambitious experiment. The birth of the Soviet Union. After the collapse of the monarchy, Russia seemed like a shattered country on the brink of chaos. The empty throne had left a power vacuum, and it was in this vacuum that Vladimir Ilyich Lenin emerged, an exiled revolutionary with a clear vision, to transform Russia into something completely new. The man who returned from the wars sent by the Germans, not out of generosity, but out of strategic calculation. Lenin returned to Russia in 1917 like a spark ready to ignite the empire. He took advantage of the despair, the hunger, the popular revolt. His weapon, ideology, his strategy, decisive and ruthless. The October Revolution. In just a few days, the impossible happened. The country, exhausted by the war, accepted a new order. A new state is born. Lenin transforms Russia into the world's first socialist republic. Peace with Germany is signed. Territories ceded, but the war interrupted. The economy is nationalized. Private property, replaced by the state power, is no longer in the hands of a czar, but in a single, centralized, absolute party. The future shaped by the present. The country is changed. The people live under surveillance. A new ruling elite emerges, and any opposition is crushed. But Lenin's death in 1924 leaves a huge void. A void that only someone more ruthless, more calculating, more feared could fill. Someone who would transform the USSR into a global power machine. And that someone would be Joseph Stalin. If Lenin planted the seed, Stalin would be the gardener and the executioner. The man who reinvented the USSR. Joseph Stalin is not content with governing. He redefines power, transforming the country and its inhabitants into cogs in a machine that no one dares to challenge. Paranoia, fear, and total control. These become the laws of the state. Collectivization and famine. The Russian countryside, the heart of Russia, is shaken to its roots. Millions of peasants die of hunger, while Stalin imposes forced collectivization. The cries of the people are lost in the icy wind of the steppes. Purges and terror, generals, intellectuals, workers. No one is safe. If there is suspicion, there will be execution. If there is doubt, there will be imprisonment. Fear becomes a weapon as powerful as tanks or artillery. The Gulag emerges as an archipelago of suffering and silence. But when Hitler invades, the USSR shows its brutal strength. The Great Patriotic War devastates cities, lands, and lives. 27 million Soviets die. But the empire survives and emerges, bleeding, as a nuclear superpower, ready to divide the world with the United States, the Iron Legacy. Stalin didn't just build a nation. He created an empire of fear, discipline, and absolute power. And even after his death, the world would never see the USSR or Russia the same way again. Stalin is gone, but the empire he forged has not disappeared. The USSR enters a new phase. Glory, ambition, and silent decay. The race for the future. Khrushchev denounces Stalin's crimes, but cannot erase the fear that still lingers. While the world watches in astonishment, the Soviet Union launches the first satellite into orbit. Sputnik cuts across the sky like a warning. The future belongs to the bold, but peace is tenuous. The Cold War transforms every move into nuclear chess. One wrong step could mean total destruction. The tension is constant. The fear, universal stagnation, and aging under Brezhnev. The empire appears stable, but inside it is aging, heavy, bureaucratic. Progress slows, creativity is stifled, and the country begins to feel the effects of its own grandeur. Gorbachev's late reforms, with glasnost and perestroika, Gorbachev tries to save the system. He opens windows of freedom, modernizes the economy, allows questioning, but the clock of history runs faster than the reforms. In 1991, the inevitable happens. The USSR collapses, and 15 republics become independent. The post-imperial chaos, Russia, colossal but vulnerable, enters a period of economic and political confusion. Soviet grandeur crumbles in a matter of years, leaving a void that no one dares to fill. In 1999, a former KGB agent rises to power as prime minister. Young, almost anonymous, but with a clear and silent objective: to restore Russia's greatness. The man who tamed the chaos. The country is fragmented, rich and unpunished oligarchs, unstable economy, regional wars. Putin acts swiftly and coldly. He centralizes power, confronts the oligarchs, and regains control of Chechnya. Every move is calculated. Every decision reinforces the image of strength and stability. Russia rises again. In 2014, a decision echoes around the world: the annexation of Crimea. Putin understands something fundamental. The trauma of the Soviet collapse still burns in the Russian heart. He is not just a leader, he is the restorer of lost dignity, the return of the empire. Under his command, Russia is once again heard, feared, respected. But history teaches that absolute power comes with shadows. And while Putin rules, the world watches. Is this the rebirth of an empire, or the prelude to another cycle of conflict? Today's Russia is a country imprisoned by its own past, with its feet firmly planted in the 21st century, but its soul scarred by centuries of czars, wars, revolutions, and shadows. Between continents and eras, Europe and Asia coexist in the same territory. Modernity and tradition clash at every turn. Power and fragility intertwine in the corridors of the Kremlin, a country of eternal cycles. Russian history is a circle of ascents and falls. Empires rise, collapse, and are reborn from their own ashes. Hope and fear walk side by side, like inseparable shadows, the roar that will not be silenced. As long as Russia exists, the world will continue to hear its roar, strong, unpredictable, and indomitable. And in the heart of every Russian resides the eternal question: what will be more powerful, the greatness of the past or the future that is yet to be written? This conflict is still being written, but the next chapter of the story already has a date. In the next video, the explained history of the formation of the United States of America. How was one of the most powerful nations in the world born? Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications because the story doesn't end here.